Thank you for tuning into another episode of Take 10 on Tuesdays with the Tennessee Tribune. I'm Jason Lutz. Today I have a special guest here. I'm sitting with Leatrice Ellzy, who is a cultural curator, and she is visiting Nashville today. So I thought it was important that we could sit down and talk about the city of Nashville, culture, and other things. How are you doing today?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So let's just jump right in. What exactly are you here in Nashville for?
Well, I'm here for a number of things. I'm always in Nashville for a lot of things, but this time around I am in Nashville developing a new project here called Culture Fest, which is an examination and an exploration of the art and culture of the African diaspora.
Great. Well, let's stop right there. Can you say, for our viewers who may not know, what exactly is the African diaspora?
The African diaspora is basically, in a nutshell, it is African peoples around the world. Okay. So through many ways, we have been thrown across the world. Mm-hmm. You know, in the early years, African people were explorers. So even before the slave trade, we had pretty much explored territories all over the world. You know, we were already in this country even before slavery began. And then, of course, the slave trade, you know, took millions and millions of us and sent us to the Americas and put us in Europe and put us in all these different spaces. And so the African diaspora is taking a look at people of African descent that are all over the world.
Got you. Okay. So with those different people that are around the world, and particularly here in the Western Hemisphere, what do you consider, like, how do you define culture?
Oh, how do we define culture? That's a good question. You know, I think that different people define culture differently because it depends on what aspect and how you're approaching it. You know, so obviously if you're an anthropologist, you're looking at culture as how people are and how they interact with one another and what those kind of mores and norms are that they develop. So that's kind of from an anthropology standpoint. From a creative standpoint, you know, we look at culture. It could be, you know, ethnic specific. So we're right here talking about African American or Afro diasporic culture. So it's like the culture of brown people around the world. So what are those things about us that that we can trace back? And what is it about us that you can look at people in Nigeria, people in Jamaica, people in Brazil, you know, black people in France, and what are those things that connect us all together?
Okay.
You know, there's a lot of cultural aspects of who we are as people of African descent that really do connect us all together. And the more that you travel and the more that you meet people from all these different places, and then you kind of start seeing that you're my cousin. You're my cousin, aren't you? Even the way that, like, so for example, when we start talking about culture, because we really start talking about cultural connections, you know, the Gullah people in the islands off of South Carolina, right? So you've heard of Gullah people.
Yes.
And the Gullah people have maintained more of their African heritage than any other people in this black people in this country, for various reasons. You know, so when they were, you know, those islands off of South Carolina were not very friendly. I mean, you had mosquito problems, you had all these issues, and they were growing tobacco and all those kinds of things over there, and so they were not necessarily as impacted by their white slave you know, owners as people were on other plantations, like cotton plantations, what have you, where they were living amongst them. So they were able to maintain a lot of their African heritage. So when you look at how they cook greens and how they weave baskets, you can directly link that back to Sierra Leone.
Wow.
And so they have made the direct link. I mean, even to the songs that were passed down from, there was a song that someone heard that had been passed down from Sierra Leone through all these generations and generations, and it was a Sierra Leonean song, but they sang it very clearly in South Carolina.
Wow, so that sounds like the same thing you see in a lot of Caribbean nations with people of African descent. They seem like they have a closer connection as well to Africa, and I know that their plantation owners had similar relationships. It wasn't the same as...
Yeah, the plantations that you find in the Caribbean a lot of times was that what would happen in the Caribbean is that you had plantation owners that had huge plantations. So there were only a few people that had really, really big plantations, and so there was not that much interaction between them and the enslaved people that were on their plantations. Here it was very different because in the United States, and in the southern United States, they couldn't afford those huge plantations,
Yes.
and so you didn't really have a lot of them. So you would have, they might have 20 slaves or something like that, as opposed to having hundreds of people on their plantation that they didn't have any relationship with. So the relationship between slave masters and enslaved people, and notice I say enslaved people, I always try to
rather
say that
slaves, enslaved people,
exactly,
yes.
because these are people that were kidnapped,
yes.
that were brought someplace, and
yes.
they were enslaved, so they were not, there's a difference there.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that, there became a different type of relationship between slave master and the people that they had as slaves on those plantations.
So when we're discussing these topics, especially when we're talking about people of African descent, is the way that we use language important?
Absolutely. And it absolutely is, because think about the fact that even right now with 12 Years a Slave, let's use that as an example. There's been so many, on Facebook, there's been so many debates about, especially from Black people, saying, they're extremely appalled that this film would win the Academy Award, and that these actors would be celebrated for playing, in their words, for playing slaves, a part of our history that, we'd rather forget, as opposed to looking towards our bright future. We're looking towards a very dark past.
Wow.
And I have been, I kind of engaged in all these conversations on Facebook about just that, because language does matter. So when you talk about, I'm a descendant of a slave, that's, it has a certain connotation.
Yes.
Versus I'm a descendant of a person that was enslaved, that was from someplace else, that lived a very full life, that was, you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So when you continue to trace it backwards, to understand that these people were minding their own business, living lives, raising families, running civilizations, and what have you. And so it does make a huge difference. And so there's that part of us that has tried to really eradicate and erase what happened in this country and in other places with slavery. But once when you think about, these are people who wouldn't die. These are people who refuse to die. These are people who would say one thing, but then they would go learn how to read. Mm-hmm. And so there is a perseverance and there is a greatness that these people really, they endured great brutality, but then out of that rose this thing that they brought with them.
Yes.
That still is inside of us. And so the more that we understand culture, and the more that we understand the history of all people, not even just our people, because you also have to understand, when you think about slavery, you have to understand, especially being in the South, like Jim Crow and the Civil War, and why was this important, and what does it mean now? Because it does still mean something, especially in the South. When we're fighting right now over the rebel flag.
Yes.
Where someone else is saying that's my culture. And so when you have a healthy understanding of culture, when you can put it in the context of understanding it from a historical standpoint, then we have a different type of respect for one another. Mm-hmm. So the flag was then appropriated and used for hate. Okay, so that also came, but by the same token, they can't erase their past
either, the
same way that we can't erase our past. So this is what happened. This is why it happened. We may still be on opposite ends of the spectrum, because I used to tell one of my a friend of mine, a Caucasian gentleman, who would in Georgia have the rebel flag flying high, and was proud of that flag. But I would sit next to his pool drinking tea, and he would make a statement about it, and I would say, well, good thing you all lost, because I may be serving tea as opposed to you serving me tea.
That's a good point.
But the thing is that I have a great deal of respect for him, and what he holds dear, and he has respect for me and what I hold dear. So therefore, when we understand and respect one another's cultures, then we can all together move forward. Wow. And especially in the 21st century realities and beyond. Yes. And we're so polarized in this country right now around so many things, but the more people have an understanding of culture and how culture impacts them, truly impacts them, then, and it really also, and you have to have that understanding, you have to also understand history, then we all move forward.
Yes.
But when we kind of put our heads in the sand and act like none of it matters, nobody moves forward.
Yes.
And we kind of remain polarized. And then, as far as black people are concerned, when you don't understand your past, then you don't walk into the future properly.
Yes.
You know, and you don't get everything that you deserve in the future because you don't have any understanding about this past. And the past might be a dark past for you. It might be something that you're not proud of. It may be something that you don't find strength in to kind of, to forge forward, and you don't understand that you stand on the shoulders of these people.
Yes.
And so we have a responsibility.
So that's basically what you do?
That's basically, it's kind of what I
do. Is your project going to be centered around that? The thing that you're bringing here to Nashville?
Well, the project, and and while the concept is something that I am, that I have with me and that I'm bringing, but I am working with people in Nashville to actually develop this and pull it off. I mean, Miss Perry from Tennessee Tribune actually invited me in town to said, I've always wanted to see a festival of this sort here. Can you do this for me? I hear you're the one.
Great.
And so that's how I even made it here, to even start engaging and exploring in this this conversation about culture.
That's great.
And so the event, to your to answer your question, the event it will explore some of those things, but it does it in a very different kind of way because it does it through art. And so we, for example, one of the artists that we will be working with during this is Third World, the reggae band. Mm-hmm. And so when people think about reggae, they think, I don't know what they think, but it always has to do with long dreadlocks,
yes,
and smoking marijuana.
Most people, I'd agree.
Yeah, and so when they think reggae, that's what they think about. And the reality is so far from that, of what the music is about, of what the people are about, of what the island is about, the island of Jamaica is about. So when you start talking about even their rich heritage, they were colonized by by England. Mm-hmm. They have only been out of colonization for 50 years. They just celebrated their 50-year anniversary.
That's amazing.
50 years.
Yeah.
I'm 47. I'm almost 50, And so they've only been out of, British rule for 50 years. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. And those those places in Africa that are no longer being ruled by the British or by the Portuguese or by the French,
yes,
and all the people that colonized them. So, but part of what we'll do that evening is we'll have the music, because you can't, who does not love Third World's music? But we'll also have opportunities for people to learn about the music and to learn about the culture and to learn about the food and what have you. So that when people leave that, they not only have the experience of experiencing the music, but they also take with them the experience of knowing a little bit more than they did when they walked through the door.
That's great. Well, I want to know, so once you have everything official and you have your dates, are you going to come back and tell us? Can I get the exclusive scoop?
Absolutely,
on Culture Fest?
Absolutely. and I would really like to come back a few times, even before we launch,
okay,
to talk about, to continue the conversation about culture. And, because I think that, when we think about art, when we think about culture, when we think about creativity, these things have to all be talked about and discussed in the same vein.
Yes.
Because when you think about culture, it is how your grandma makes those greens. Mm-hmm. That recipe is passed on from generation to generation, or how your mama braids hair, or your grandfather always wore something tipped to the side and with a little, all those things are these cultural pieces of us that have just kind of gone with us from generation to generation to generation, and we do things for a reason.
Yes.
And so I think that that's a very, very important conversation to have here, especially here in Nashville.
Yes.
And when you look at, when I look around Nashville and I see, just the climate that is here in Nashville, the cultural climate and the cultural arts climate, and I think that there is so much that's here. Kwame has been doing the African Street Fair Festival, for example, it has to be 30 years.
Yes,
he was doing when I was a student here at Tennessee State, because I actually was a student at TSU.
So you have some Nashville roots.
I got Nashville roots. I got deep Nashville roots. I got family in Nashville, so So Nashville's not new to me. I'm not new to Nashville, but I remember him doing the street festival when I was here in Nashville. I know that you have the Jefferson Street Blues and Jazz Festival, which I haven't been to, but that is something that has been going on for years, where they've been celebrating that music. You've got the African American Museum of Music that is coming.
Yes, yep.
Which is going to be very exciting, and it's going to be very, very important for the country, not just for Nashville, but for the country. To have some type of repository where people can come and get that type of information, about jazz, about the blues, about the work songs, and what that
what that means. Yes,
exactly, like how everything just kind of evolved from one thing to another. We recently lost Amiri Baraka, who wrote a seminal work around the music of black people called Blues People. And in that book he talks about just this movement, and he stopped at a certain point because he wrote the book back in like 67.
Wow.
Was it 67? It was somewhere around there. And then he did another printing of it so that he could add hip hop. And so there was another edition of it that was done, because Amiri Baraka, being a poet and being someone that understood words and understood tempo and understood how music really seeps into a person's soul, he knew that it was important to deal with hip hop and to understand hip hop, as that from that generation.
I gotta pick that. What's the title of it?
Blues People.
Yeah, I gotta pick that up.
No, you absolutely should pick it up.
I did have one last question I want to ask before I let you go, and it does pertain to Nashville in a sense. Nashville is gaining this national presence. We're also really known for our creatives, music, even in the digital world, graphic design, photography, videography. I see so much of that. Other cities, other regions are noticing that. How do we break through and let the national scene know that there's also an African American creative presence here? Because I hear so much about how great Nashville is, but it seems like for a city that's nearly 30% African American, that it should be some mention of our creative, what we're bringing to the table as well.
Well, I think that one thing is that all of the things that are happening from the African American community, it kind of has to be galvanized. I mean, it's like everything else in the marketplace right now, is that you have to package it and you have to brand it. If it's not packaged and branded, no one notices it.
Yes,
it's kind of like there's a tree. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there,
make noise,
doesn't make noise. And so what happens is that, and it's not just Nashville, it's in a lot of different communities, that we are not used to packaging and branding our work. We complain a lot about the appropriation of our work and how how others appropriate our music and what have you. However, we don't brand and own it the way that we should. And so absolutely it's appropriated. And then you can't really be mad about the appropriation because you didn't really take full ownership of it to begin with. And then something else that we do is that once we've done it, we move on to something different. So because it even happened, for example, with like the banjo, which is an instrument that has its roots in Africa. They can kind of trace it back to Mali, but it totally got appropriated, and we kind of stopped messing with it. And so you don't hear banjo in R&B music.
That sounds like how we young African Americans don't even know that rock and roll was something that...
Absolutely. And so that is why this effort is important. Because it's important for us to understand and take ownership of it, for us to package it, and also to further develop it, and also to benefit from it. So when you look at hip hop music, for example, hip hop, I have like these very mixed feelings about hip hop. I am a kid of the 80s, so I grew up listening to hip hop. I appreciate hip hop. I love hip hop. Am I a hip hop head? Probably not as much as a whole lot of my friends are. But, at some point in the late 80s, it took a turn. And it took a turn and it went into this other direction. And because hip hop was a young music, and it was young, it was kind of ruled by young people, there wasn't any wisdom around it. So when you think about music from back in the day, you had A&R departments who their whole job was, like the A&R team at Motown is like keep them groomed, keep them out of trouble, do this, do that, do the other thing. When you let record labels be in charge of these young black artists who already were really young and didn't know any of those things, and were getting in trouble because it's kind of the nature of where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
Of that kind of, they came from a certain hood, and in that hood, this is what we do,
yep.
and this is what we're going to use. And the record labels are like, and that's how we're going to sell your record.
Yep. Yep.
So what happened is that, so once again, it does become appropriation again. It was an appropriation of an entire lifestyle. Mm-hmm. That was a negative lifestyle. It's the lifestyle that people people used to try to grow out of.
Yes.
And then what happened is we turned around and it made it popular, sexy, pretty, music videos on BET that were beautiful and popping and beautiful girls and everything that everybody wanted,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a different type of appropriation of the culture, which turned on our communities. Mm-hmm. And so now we have this kind of new culture of death, of
Mm-hmm.
killing, of of people being disrespectful to women and men being disrespectful to themselves, and what have you, and everybody being disrespectful to children and families, and like that whole concept of of what is appropriate for children and families. Because at the same time that you had all that happening, you have the war on drugs going on. I mean, so everything is connected. Everything mm-hmm. is connected. And when we talk about culture, it's all connected.
So it sounds like Culture Fest, it's going to be something fun, something the city needs, but it's going to be something people can learn a lot from.
Well, people, at the end of the day, if we're not thinking, Jason,
mm-hmm.
and we have to think not only about what we do in our day-to-day, but also think strategically about what we're doing in the future. And those people that were reflected in 12 Years a Slave, they absolutely thought about their seed and their seed. Mm-hmm. That's why it was important to read. That was why it was important to save. That's why it was important to do all these things to make sure that they don't have this same experience.
Yes. Wow. Wow.
And so
that's great.
So Culture Fest hopefully will start this community to have those types of conversations. Because that's all we want to do. We want to spark a flame. To have those types of conversations. And it doesn't have to be us that has those conversations. I mean, I would love for other organizations to like kind of catch the fire and start having those kind of conversations themselves. Because what this ultimately does is it really builds community. So it builds community by connecting people, and it builds community from a knowledge space. The more that we know, the more that we want to know.
That's right. Wow, that's good. Oh, that's good. I got to end it on that note. That's great. So we will definitely be looking forward to Culture Fest. I really appreciate you coming to Nashville. I appreciate you taking your time out today. And definitely as more news about your event comes forth, please come back and share. Our event.
That's right, because this event belongs to Nashville.
It belongs to Nashville. So it's our event. That's
Absolutely.
great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And I also want to thank you for tuning in to Take 10 on Tuesdays with the Tennessee Tribune. See you next time.